Welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience, a place for leaders to get inspired, be challenged, and grow. I am your host, Reshad Oberlander. Let's get started. Today's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience is brought to you by my 7-day Leadership Growth Challenge. It's a free challenge that I've created, and it's delivered by email over the course of 7 days. I've created 7 compelling questions to challenge various aspects of your leadership, the way you lead, and why you lead. Go to reshadoberlander.com and scroll down until you find the 7-day leadership challenge, or look for the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience. I'm so glad you've joined us today. And today I'm joined by Andra Judge, founder and CEO of Pure Gems, a nonprofit focused on empowering young women for success. Andra is also the CEO of leadership and organizational transformation coaching business, the Convergence Lab. Andra holds a master's in industrial and organizational psychology and is currently completing her Ph.D. in business psychology. Andra calls Tampa, Florida home and lives now in Washington, D.C. Andra, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this. So thank you again.
I'm happy to have you. And it's really exciting to get to chat again. We had a little conversation a few weeks ago and it was really good.
Yes, I agree.
Awesome. So let's just jump right in. Why don't you start by sharing a high-level overview of some of the things you're working on right now?
Okay, so as you mentioned in the introduction, the biggest project I have is my PhD that I'm pursuing in business psychology. It feels as if it's kind of like the elephant in my life. It's definitely taking up a lot of room. But in my little bit of free time or spare time that I can carve out, I'm still actively pursuing building my nonprofit organization, Pure Gems, and my consulting firm, the Convergence Lab. And so those, among a few other consultancy projects that I have through an organization that I support currently, my plate is kind of full, but exciting, very exciting.
That's cool. That sounds like a lot. It sounds like you've got some really interesting things work on the go, between the Convergence Lab and Pure Gems. It sounds like a really cool thing. Something I'd really like to clarify is, what is the difference between what we would think of as traditional psychology and what you do in business psychology?
I get that question a lot. So the running joke with a lot of persons who do business psychology is no one knows what that really is. And so if I could simplify that, the best way I could describe it is that when you think of traditional psychology, think of in terms of helping persons identify any mental illnesses that they may have, and then assessing them and coming up with different treatment plans. Where as business psychology or industrial and organizational psychology, what we focus on is how do we take some of those same theories that exist in just psychology in general and apply them to a workplace setting or to a business structure. I guess one example I could give is there's a theory of decision-making that exists in the world of psychology. And so I may be interested in looking at how leaders use cognitive processing to make decisions that may then impact employee engagement in a company. So that's how it could differ from if I was going to therapy in a traditional sense, because I may be suffering from depression. So there are overlapping theories that may inform both fields, but you apply them differently.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sounds good. I think that really clears it up a little bit. How much overlap do you find between the two disciplines? Like, I mean, if you're working with a business and there's kind of the outplay from, what you're saying, like say for the decision making, for example, how it affects employee engagement, and then, where do you find that there's overlap where an employee then wants to find traditional psychological treatment in that case? Like,
yeah, so I think that the very first thing that comes to my mind I work full time as well, in addition to doing all these things. The type of company that I work for, we do a lot of mental health and behavioral health services. And so as an employee, there's this thing called employee assistance. And so it's common in a lot of different programs. It's actually a provider of those types of services to other organizations. But in those aspects, if an employee is suffering with, let's just say, tobacco use, and they're looking to stop using tobacco, they can engage those type of behavioral services that can cater to helping that person encounter cessation. However, they may have found in their job performance that smoking was in response to anxiety. And so they may feel that, you know what, maybe I need to go get counseling for my anxiety because I'm really triggered to smoke when I'm actually anxious. And I also noticed that my ability to make a decision when I'm anxious also is not great. So if I'm the internal consultant as an IO psychologist, I may not directly address their mental health state, the anxiety, because that's a different field. But I would look at the type of decisions they're making and can make recommendations broadly about different interventions that that employee can look at. If it's self-efficacy, if it's looking at outside triggers that may be influencing them, and then hopefully that will lead them to make their own personal choice, because I'm more engaged on the organizational impact that it's having and not so much of their personal life. That's where you're going to get that counseling therapy aspect of it. But they interlap because the human being comes to work, and it's hard to stop being human when you're in the workplace. So you have to make sure you're not overstepping into another realm of not responsibility, but if you're not licensed to perform those type of services, even if you can spot them, you have to make sure that you're following the appropriate organizational guidelines when referring to different services. But you can see the intersection pretty clearly if you're in these fields.
Yeah, absolutely. How much of your work do you find, or how much of your studies have you found to be geared towards understanding things like biases, discrimination, prejudice, stereotypes, things like that in the workplace?
So I would say as early as my undergraduate career, I attended undergrad. I entered undergrad when I was 18 in 2003. And so as early on in my education and career, biases were one of the things that we hit on. We talked about different types of biases and stereotypes, some that were to attraction, and how if a person is viewed as attractive, people tend to associate intelligence with that person. And so from the very beginning of my education, I've seen how biases can inform the way a person thinks and makes decisions and act. And so it's been very paramount in my career and in my continued education, because those biases that we've talked about from a theoretical perspective, they come to life in everyday circumstances. It comes to life in how I engage with even my professors, and how then I engage with colleagues in the workplace. And so I think the education that I've been afforded has helped me to see biases are, no one's immune to them, and they exist everywhere. And we have different types of biases, and certain scenarios can bring existing biases to the surface in a way that other scenarios may not. And so it's been interesting to see a lot of the theoretical understandings and underpinnings that we read about and research about actually be present in the real world. So that's kind of my observation so far.
Sure. So our paths originally crossed on Instagram, and I had a chance to have a really great conversation with you, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, on racism, biases, and so on. But before we talk more about that, would you share a little bit about your experience with racism?
Yes. So my experience with racism has been, I guess the easiest way to describe it is it's kind of been trifold. And I like to say death by 1,000 paper cuts, because when I think of racism and the way that I've encountered it, it's been in a series of microaggressions. And so just little small paper cuts that I'll get throughout life. And normally it happens from three lenses, and they kind of collide to make this one like cut in me when I interact with people. It's been racial in terms of sex and in terms of age. I'm African American, so when you look at me, I'm brown. I look Black. If anyone had any idea of what African Americans look like, I fit that category. Then I've been often assumed to be younger than what I actually am. So there's that little bit of ageism. And then I'm a woman, I'm a female. And so then there's that blend of sexism. And I haven't encountered experiences where it's been completely just one thing. I've normally seen how those different biases have been used to form opinions towards me through people. And racism for me, when I look at specific microaggressions, it has centered around my experience. People thinking that, oh, well, I didn't think that you would be interested because I didn't think that you had the background, and never being asked certain questions. And others who were not African American, the assumption was made that they were interested in different career opportunities or did have a certain educational background. I've been approached in the workplace and by people who, my white colleagues, and then asked to touch my hair, and asked when I had locks, like people asking, is that your real hair? And I'm just like, I never would go to someone and ask them, is that their real hair? Just inappropriate type of engagement. And I think the biggest that stands out for me in terms of being African American and a woman is this notion that when I speak directly or firmly, I'm all of a sudden being an aggressive person. And it's an attribute that women in general, I think, deal with in the workplace, no matter their ethnicity or their racial group that they identify with. But when you compound it with the different tropes that exist regarding Black women, the age-old statement of the angry Black woman is is in the minds of a lot of people. And I recently had an experience with a gentleman in my workplace who, on a conference call, I'm the only African American on the call. I'm the only woman on the call. And we're talking about an issue, and I'm bringing some concerns up. And I was told, well, when we speak with this particular group, we don't need to be confrontational. And I said, I don't think anyone plans to be confrontational. And I don't understand why this statement is being made to me. And it was such a blatant, aggressive response, because the way in which I spoke to my team at that time was, we have an issue. I've encountered this, and this. And here are my concerns for this meeting we're going to have tomorrow with this client. And in that conversation, the way I presented this information, it was viewed as confrontational to my team, whom I'm trying to protect and prepare them for a meeting that is about to take place in less than a day. And so, having been on conversations or in conversations and meeting with this particular person before, who was a white male, like several conversations, he has never made that statement to anyone else in our company. And I'm just like, this is unique. So it comes out in ways that, for me, it's normally in the workplace setting or in educational settings, because that's where I spend most of my time. And so it's subtle sometimes. The term I use is dog whistle. You normally hear that with politics, but racism has a dog whistle language. It's spoken at such a high volume that people who know what it sounds like hear it. And so it's interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting description for it, the dog whistle volume. And I think it is an interesting thing that there are so many of these issues. We may have talked about it a little bit when we spoke earlier, but there's so many prejudices based on, you mentioned earlier about how someone who's attractive is perceived as more successful. And there's often things in human resources and recruiting that is well known that oftentimes a guy that shows up in a suit and is well built and works out at the gym a lot and looks good and is attractive is more likely to get a more successful offer with a higher pay opportunity than someone who does not fit that description. And it's not as much based on the true qualifications of the individual, but sometimes based on the image someone has in their mind of what this person should be or should look like or should act or should behave or what have you. So definitely things that need to be addressed. And of course, racism and discrimination have huge social and political ramifications that desperately need to be addressed. When we drill down into it, these issues start, I think, with each of us as leaders and as individuals. And it's really a condition of the human heart. So, Deandra, how and where do we start changing that?
Well, first, I want to say how much I agree with your statement that racism is really a heart issue. And I think that a lot of individuals may not see it that way. I think that if we start first with understanding that it's a matter of the heart, I think we have real potential to not only affect change within ourselves, but then in relationships that we have with others, or even creating relationships with others. And so I think when I think of racism in terms of being a heart issue, I think of, well, what hurts my heart? What does my heart aim to do? My heart never wants to be hurt, right? My heart wants to be protected. It wants to be safe. When I think about all the things that could make me unsure or make my heart feel unsafe, I think of words like fear. When a person has fear, no one wants to have those fears manifest. They don't want their worst fears realized. And I think if persons took time to really dig deep into what they were afraid of and started to look at things a little more objectively and take it step by step, I think that's one aspect of our heart issue that we can resolve. Another aspect of racism being rooted to a heart issue, I think of pride. Pride is a killer. Pride can cause you to overlook not just a person's ability, but their humanity. Pride says that I'm above this, I'm better than, and it doesn't have regard for anyone else. And so when I think of racism, people who are truly practicing that life, that belief, that attitude system, there's an arrogance that sits on their heart that doesn't allow them to consider the other person in a way that allows others to be human, in a way that allow others to have value and worth. I think another part of the heart issue is rejection. Mm-hmm. People who have been rejected look for acceptance. And so if I can convince myself, or if I hear a narrative that says that in order to be valued, I have to devalue something else or someone else, that can be very attractive and appealing to someone who is dealing with deep-seated rejection. Rejection is powerful. If you don't know how to handle healing from rejection, it can become the basis from which you perform, the basis from which you see a thing, the basis from which you make a decision. If people who are rejected, and especially rejected leaders who have struggled and deal with rejection are not well if they don't know how to heal from it. And they tend to make decisions from a position of avoiding being rejected. And so when I think of racism, I also think of persons who have heart issues that are rooted in rejection. And I think the last thing, hatred. And hate is we weren't allowed to say hate growing up. My family was like, hate is a cuss word. You just can't say that. Like, no, you don't hate anything. You may hate the devil, but nothing else. That's it. And so when I think of hatred, it's really just this deep-seated despising of something, just like, I just can't stand this thing. And I feel like hatred is a heart issue, and persons who have succumbed to this idea and belief of racism, I think they struggle with hatred, but self-hatred. I don't know how one could love themselves enough and still practice racism and engage in it openly and privately if they had real self-love. And I think that hatred has become a consuming nature for a lot of persons, unfortunately, who have racist beliefs and practice them. I think even more so practicing them. And so all of those things combined, it sets up the person to have a heart that has murderous impulses. I posted something on my private Instagram page right around the death of George Floyd. And I said, racism is always lethal. It kills. And I think people only stop at thinking that racism kills human bodies. But if you stop it there, you don't have the opportunity to see the full gamut of how racism impacts a nation. Racism kills dreams. It kills unity. It kills hopes. It kills so much. Racism is deadly. And it doesn't have to put a physical body in the ground to be considered murderous. And so I think if persons broaden their view and understanding of how racism can impact others and themselves, it requires a death to yourself to be racist. You have to say that I'm going to no longer allow myself to learn more because I'm going to stop at my current understanding of how I see the world. And so you have just killed your own future because you've resolved that this must be the absolute truth. There's nothing else to add to it unless it already supports my existing belief of a thing. And if that's the case, you just committed your own personal death. And I find that unfortunate. So racism it kills you and others. So yeah.
That's powerful. And I think that there is a lot of power in what you just said. And I think that possibly the biggest takeaway in your answer just now is that, racism, people think of perhaps the death of a person as maybe the most damage that could be done, but it is far more far-reaching, and there is death beyond just the death of a person, as you described, the death of dreams and the death of unity in a nation. And I think we're seeing many of those ripple effects, across the United States and across the globe, various protests and things, and a lot of angry discussions and a lot of more peaceful discussions. But there's a lot of death happening, and it's not all in the physical.
Yes.
And I think that there's definitely some importance there to realize that this is a dividing. I'm not sure what word I want to use. I'll call it a disease, but it is causing serious division. It is causing some problems, and I think that a lot of people struggle with the issue in various ways. I think that there's a variety, I think, of questions for and against the Black Lives Matter movement and racism in general and prejudices and things like that. And I think that many of those issues need to be put aside because racism exists. Yes. It is wrong. Yes. It needs to change. Yes. And that's where we need to be. Rather than, did the police officer behave wrongly or rightly? Really, it was wrong, and racism is wrong. And what I'm trying to say is let's stop trying to draw away from the issue at hand here. I think that racism and biases and things that lead to those more extreme showings is wrong and it needs to change. So
if I'm hearing your heart correctly, and I use that word intentionally, it's we're reacting and responding so much to the after effects, the aftershocks of racism, of a long lasting culture and belief of racism in the world. And so if we don't go to the root, I was reading an article that spoke about Juneteenth and kind of gave a little more clarity on what that moment in history was really about. And what I found very poignant in that article was that the imagery used, it described racism as a tree. And it said that a branch of racism was cut off when we ended slavery, but the tree still stands. The roots are still in the ground. And I thought that that was probably one of the best visual examples that I could wrap my head around in a way that can be shared with the world, because people have stopped at, oh, well, slavery is over. Oh, well, we had the civil rights movement. Okay, well, that's two branches. What about the rest? But more than the branches, what about the root? If we don't dig something up out of the root, it can still grow. And I think that we haven't put an axe to the root of racism. And to do that, this is where I think we have to be honest and courageous and actually admit that we have to sit down and talk about things of our past. As an American, there are things we did wrong, and I say we globally. And so if we don't have the courage to sit down at a table to talk about what I consider to be the sins of our if we don't talk about how limited in scope the Constitution was written in, you can't ask us to accept a governmental system that in its inception was exclusionary. And so it's looking at the heart of the matter. And so while I'm not going to go so far to say throw the Constitution away or anything of that nature, I think we have to have honest conversation and courageous conversations about where our forefathers were in that time frame. We just can't change and rewrite history. We have to acknowledge it and learn from it and grow from it. And I think it's in those honest conversations and those courageous conversations that we can start to move forward and look at how what started one way has continued and become perpetuated in various aspects of what came or what was birthed from that. And so the fabric of nations matter, and you don't just change it. It's all interwoven. You can't just change it overnight. You have to start at the beginning. Why, how did we get here? What was the first decision that we can point to that set us on the path or the trajectory that we're on? And so the heart of it isn't what we're realizing today. Today, we're just feeling the aftershocks of a beginning of an initial decision. And so until we deal with the root of that, we're going to be hard pressed for change. It's going to be hard to come by that in a meaningful, sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. And that leads me, I think, into the next part here that I want to talk about. But I'll just say that I think that the wave of change is going to be driven by the efforts of many. Because, I mean, you can't change the organization of the political government without changing the people who are in it. And so, what I want to say now is a friend of mine shared this brilliant graphic on Facebook from it was from a cartoon called Life, I think is what it's called. And it really summarizes well some of my thoughts on the subject. And I'll just read what it says. It says, "No matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It is my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, prejudice, and ultimately discrimination." Can you help me unpack this a little bit and maybe provide a couple of ways we can practice this personally and as leaders?
Sure. I think that's a very spot on statement for one. I think just starting at the beginning of that statement is acknowledging that it's a daily pursuit. No person fully arrives at being fair, objective, unbiased in a matter of one aha moment or, moment of awareness. It's a daily pursuit. So I think the first thing is acknowledging that it's a daily effort. I think the next thing is committing to being self-aware, which for me, the verb I would use or noun or whatever is introspection. I think that as individuals and especially as leaders, we have to commit to a deep level of introspection where we sit and actually ask questions of ourselves. How do I really feel about this? I know that I have in this season of my life, especially with the pandemic and then all the social unrest that we've experienced through unjust killings of unarmed people, I've had to face my own biases and I've had to ask myself some questions. And personally, as a believer of Christ, I've had to go to God and be like, I just don't like this right here. And I have a problem. And I had to be honest and acknowledge the areas of my heart that need to be healed, that need to be uncovered first so they can be healed and cleansed. And I think as individuals and as leaders, we have to commit to the self-work of looking at the condition of our heart and becoming intimately aware of where we're sick. Where is the psychosis of our heart? Where is the pathology of our heart? Where are the blemishes on our heart? And if we aren't willing to just become intimately acquainted with our dysfunction, it's going to be very impossible to actually do anything. So I think one, it's a daily pursuit. Two, commit to introspection. I think the other thing is having a partner to do life with. And this could be in at least one. You probably need more than one person in your life to do life with, whether, family, friends, colleagues, a spouse, etc. You need multiple perspectives, diversity of perspectives around you. And this to me is absolutely it's a necessity if you're going to call yourself a leader. You cannot know everything at any given moment in the world. There's just, we're finite human beings. And so if we're not willing to engage people who have diverging perspectives on the matter than us, then we're basically signing up and resigning to a life of basically limited views, poor explanations of things, prejudice and bias. You're basically committing to that lifestyle. And so I think for me, I have one of my sisters, she will text me or call me and she'll be like, sis, let me ask you this, because you will discern. I don't discern, and I need someone who's more discerning, who's a little more logical, and she was just like, I need you because I bring a different perspective. In turn, I call her because she has a pure heart. I'm very calculating, I'm methodical, I'm forward thinking, I'm strategizing. So for me, if I'm not careful, I can take my heart out of a matter and be more like cold in a sense. She gives everyone the benefit of the doubt initially and in such a pure and loving way. So I have to call her and I was like, let me just run this scenario by you and you tell me what you think. And there are times where we both give each other a different perspective. And so again, if you're a leader, especially, I think having diversity of perspectives around you and people that will challenge you and speak truth to you, because we a lot of times aren't able to change anything if we're not willing to accept the truth of a thing. So those would be the three key ways: daily pursuit, introspection, and commit to diversity of perspectives around you.
Those are great. And I like that a lot, actually. I think that they all have really good value. Make it a daily practice is important. I think that most things worth doing have a daily practice. And of course, the willingness to look at oneself, and also the willingness to kind of have other people around you who are going to keep you accountable.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. I suspect that this conversation, as far as um, biases and stereotyping and stuff like that, is going to be a recurrent theme for me. It's something that kind of has had a corner of my heart, I think, for a long time, because there's a lot of, I think, maybe well-meaning information out there that just treads lightly between the border of stereotyping and biases, but it also treads the border very carefully of teetering over into, I don't know if I want to call it quite discrimination or prejudice, but like, in recruiting and in HR and stuff like that, you're often taught to examine a person's resume and look for certain things. And a lot of what I would say is traditional wisdom in that is beginning to fall away a little bit, because gaps in resumes don't always mean this person's unemployable. What are the extenuating circumstances, and what have they had to go through in life that has led to that point, and being willing to ask the questions. Even things like, the generational differences. And there are some generational differences, and it makes sense in some cases, but it's painting very broad strokes in a lot of cases. And I, as a millennial or a Gen X, depending on whose research you go by, I don't always fit the mold of what that it describes me of, right? Even my own name, Reshad, is not typically associated with a person of my demographic. It's more often people always expect me to walk in and be an person of brown descent, and they're surprised the fact that I'm a white guy with a beard, right? And so there's a lot of stuff like that I think is both interesting and concerning at the same time, and I think is going to be a point of recurring conversation for me in the future, and I think should be a point of recurring conversation for a lot of people. As the statement that we just read says, it's got to be something that we look at, and it's our responsibility to examine ourselves on a regular basis, a daily basis, as you pointed out, and root out those things.
Yes.
So this has been a really good conversation. As we begin to wrap up, just shifting gears a little bit into a couple of questions I like to ask my guests before we finish. What is one thing you know about life or leadership that you wish everyone knew?
One word: humility. I wish people knew that in life, especially as leaders, which I think in some regard we're all leaders, so this is for everyone, it requires humility. And I think it's such a simple word that it's easy to gloss over, and even easier to become deceived that you don't have an issue with humility. I will never forget, it was 2012, and I was at it was like a lunch event with a few ladies in this group that I used to be a part of. And long story short, I was sharing with them some messages I had in my phone from this guy. It's very personal, but it was a guy I was dating. The part that stood out to me was I'm thinking I had all the right in the world to be angry at this gentleman, and the person who was giving me some advice, she said, "Sis, you're being very prideful." And I said, "What? Me? No, not I." And it was the most profound moment in my life, because I've never had been told I was prideful. And in the scenario that I was describing to her, it didn't fit the traditional sense of or definition of pride, right? It wasn't me boasting about job awards or accolades and things of this. It was more subtle, and I think therefore more deadly. And so what I'm grateful for is in 2012, I learned that I had a pride problem. And ever since then, I've been like, okay, God, check my pride, because I need your help with this. And seeing how pride rose up in me. And so therefore how to guard against it. So when I had that understanding and that awareness, I was better positioned to fight against that urge of being prideful in the way that it existed in me. And so one word would be humility. We don't know everything. And we have to be willing to accept new information. And just even think about our overall conversation today in terms of biases and prejudices. One of the definitions of being of a prejudice is having making an assumption or having a belief about a thing or a person that's not rooted in actual experience. And so when I think of how humility can come in and be the grace that we need to live this life, humility says, I've never actually engaged this person. So let me be more open to learning, because maybe they have some data points about their life and their experience that I just don't know about. And so now I'm going to enter this dialogue with them with more of a curiosity than a settled mind on what I've chosen them to be or put them in this box. And so, but that takes humility to admit that you don't know everything. It takes humility to say, I'm probably missing some information here. So let me just be open to the fact that I may need to get a little bit more. And so when I get that information, I can pivot. I think as leaders, sometimes people, and you see this especially in politics, people will criticize a person for changing their mind. And I've always baffled out that. And I'm like, to me, it takes a lot of courage and humility to change your stance on something, especially if you're a public figure, because people will say that you're a flip-flopper and you're fickle. I think people who have the courage to truly change their stance, you have to be humble. You have to say, you know what? I was wrong. And now I know better. I'm going to do better. I'm going to do differently. And therefore, I can't continue in this current path that I've been on. What I did then was based on the information I had in that particular season. In this current season, I have more information, or I have better information. I have more accurate information. So it requires or necessitates it necessitates me to move in a different way. And so, but you have to be humble and know that you could be wrong and know that you don't have all the answers. And so that to me is what makes a great person, and especially to makes a great leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Brilliant answer. And I mean, I've definitely had to face that monster in my life. I think I think it's not an uncommon monster to face for people who are young and who are coming into leadership for the first time, perhaps. But brilliant answer. When it's all said and done, what 3 words do you want to be used to describe your life?
I would say honesty, just, and merciful. I use different verb tenses or something, I'm sure, but I want to be known as someone who was honest, who was a vessel of truth. I want people to know that when they hear me speak, they can trust what I say, that even if I make a mistake, that I'm humble enough to come back and confess or should share that, so that I don't have them continue in error with me. Just in that I believe in justice, I believe in equity, I believe in equality, I believe in fairness. And I would hope that persons would see me as someone who gave everyone a chance and believe that everyone was deserving of more than one chance. And so, yeah, justice hits a little different from me when I think of just my own personal experiences in life and sitting at tables where I had the power to vote if a person was going to receive a job or not, and hearing people look at their resume and say, well, they were an admin assistant. They don't have the desire to work hard. And I said, but I was an admin assistant, and now I'm sitting at a table making a decision about someone and their future. How dare you? What? So I want to be fair. I want to give everyone a chance. And then mercy. As a person who can be very rational at times. I desire to have a heart that's compassionate towards persons. And to me, that means you have to have a heart that loves mercy. And mercy means that even if you wrong me, I'm willing to hear you out. I'm willing to forgive. Mercy it's for the people who make the mistakes. Mercy is for you because you yourself make mistakes. Mercy says, I am not in a position to weigh you, judge you more than I can judge myself. I can't be more critical of you than I am of me. So let me extend mercy because I know I will always need it at some point in my life. And so those would be the three words. I want to be known as honest, just, and merciful.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, that's just about wrapped up our time here. Deandra, where can people connect with you and follow what you're doing?
Okay, so if you're interested in learning more about Pure Gems, which is a nonprofit that looks at helping young ladies become strong, resilient women, you can follow me on Instagram at Pure Gems, which is spelled PUR_GEMS. Then if you're interested in watching the growth and development of my consulting firm, which is the Convergence Lab, you can follow me also on Instagram at the Convergence Lab. And that's all one word, no extra characters. And then if you're interested in my personal journey in life, it's an open page because I'm pretty transparent. You can follow me at Deandra Michelle, and that's DEANDRA_Michelle, MICHELLE. It's a lot of food and fitness on there, even though it has nothing to do with anything but the stuff I like to do on a day-to-day basis. But hopefully it'll entertain you and inspire you.
Awesome. I've been entertained by what you're saying and sharing on there. So thank you for doing that. It's been a pleasure today, Deandra. I really enjoyed it. Great value on a number of different points. So I'm glad that we got to talk today, and I'm excited for the listeners to tune in and to hear what you have to say. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. It's an honor.
Thanks.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, would you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share this with a friend. It spreads the word and helps the podcast grow. You can also find me on social media at RE Oberlander. Until next time, stay awesome.